Hey beautiful people, welcome to part 2 of the Kissler family tragedy. Last time we talked about both Andrew and Robert growing up, their childhood, and then we talked about Robert Kissler, where him and his wife was going to get divorced, and then she ended up murdering him and concealing his death and eventually being convicted of murder. So today we're going to talk about Andrew. Andrew met his wife Haley through his sister Jane. Haley was Jane's ski coach, and so later Jane would introduce her brother to Haley because she thought that she was a perfect fit for her brother. And Haley and Jane, were really good friends, just from, her teaching her how to ski. Andrew and Haley got married in 1992, and they moved into a co-op that was about $250,000. Now Haley herself, she came from money, and she went to Ivy League schools, had a great education. Her dad owned a $500 million engineering firm. Really, after Haley and Andrew married, he opened his own real estate company. And he also, because people looked at Andrew with amazement. They thought he was very financially savvy. He was able to take something and take nothing and make it into something. And so his co-op, where he lived with Haley, they ended up making him the treasurer of the co-op. But shortly after that, he would start to divert the financial statements and bills to himself directly instead of the organization. And he also would be the one who would only be responsible for signing off on checks, which made it a little fishy. But other than that, Andrew seemed to do a fine job. And he would go on to head this renovation of their lobby for $1 million. But anybody who was looking at the renovations that were done would say they didn't see $1 million of work that was done in that co-op's lobby. And it would come to fruition that Andrew had created these fake companies that he used to flow money in, like as though they were doing the work, where the work this company wasn't doing the work, but the company was it was a fake company owned by him. And in the end, Andrew would have taken out $2 million in the co-op's name. It was never known when the co-op, got wind of what was happening. It was never really realized what was his motivation for, stealing money from this co-op, because he was making really good money. So what he did is, as in an agreement, they settled. Well, he had a confidential settlement, although I don't know how confidential the settlement is, when he settled to cough up $4.7 million for what he had taken. So I don't know how confidential that could be. So in a way to kind of move away from his past, or to avoid, some of the backlash that may have occurred that happened at that co-op, he moved his family to Greenwich, Connecticut, and Haley would stay behind there till the kids finished school. So he had already started his life there, and she stayed behind. Haley never kind of understood why Andrew made a quick exit from Vermont, but she found out. Before he had left, he had took the co-op and put it into her name. And she just looked at it, it was an endearing thing that was done to show his undying love for her. But she found out later what the true reason was. Ultimately, Haley thought, she knew her husband was doing some shady dealings. She didn't know exactly what it was, Although, personally, I think she knew more than what she let on to know. But she also said that she thought that he was a truly really good person underneath it all. You know, all of the things that he was doing. Haley would also say that, you know, her husband suffered from bipolar, and she chalked it up to his childhood, how he was brought up and how he was, but I don't know. It was some underlining of the type of relationship that he had with his dad, but he felt that his dad liked Rob's more and that he paid more attention to Rob, and he was always vying for that. So he would say he never had a really good relationship with his brother or his father. By June, Haley and the kids, her two kids, had moved to Greenwich, Connecticut, to be with Andrew. And Andrew, during this time, during this transition, he had sold their 74th Street apartment. He had started renting that Greenwich, Connecticut house for $14,000 a year. Yeah, no, $14,000 a month. Wow. And, you know, he had liquidated about $25 million of his New Jersey real estate. So during this time, you know, Andrew is buying and selling, and so he liquidated all of his New Jersey properties, and he got $25 million. And after paying off the debts about $8 million, he netted about $3 million, which he actually got more than that, but he failed to share that with his investors, which one of them just happened to be his brother Rob. But what he would do, he didn't tell them how much of, like, he would sell buildings and not tell them that he had sold the building. What he would do was give them their portion of what they would have gotten for that month, and would show them very nice financials to show that they were still doing well. So he was just making up shit. Soon after that, of course, you know that Rob was murdered by his wife, and the kids eventually came to live with Andrew and Haley. So now Haley is responsible for taking care of 5 kids. And of course, that is like a huge adjustment and a huge burden. But, you know, they accommodated. They, you know, bought a larger dining room table. They would get writing lessons for the kids just so that the kids had the same lifestyle that they had before. They already had a big, beautiful house in Greenwich. And so they, you know, would try to accommodate the lifestyle, and it just meant they had to spend more money. But Andrew would just bill it back to Rob's estate to take care of it, you know, to take care of the additional things that he had to buy for bringing on the kids. Later, Haley would start to feel some resentment because she felt like she was the only one who was taking care of all of these kids alone, and Andrew was out having an affair, doing all of these things, and wasn't helping her with the kids. But they would all sit down and have dinner together, which was really important to them. So he was there, but he wasn't putting his effort in to help her with the kids. She would later always be venting to Jane, you know, Andrew's sister, about all of these things, about, you know, Andrew having an apartment, her thinking that he has a Ponzi scheme, all of these things that her husband was doing. She would vent to Jane, and Jane would eventually, you know, after it started getting concerning, she would start jotting down notes from all of her conversations with Haley, especially when it came to her resenting the kids and her making comments that she was busting her ass to take care of Rob's kids. You know, she would make comments like, you know, she thought that Andrew was having some shady business dealing. She would make comments to Jane like, I'm not gonna know what to say to my kids when their dad ends up in jail. And she would say things like, oh, when I see Rob's kids, they remind me of Andrew, and I just get angry at them. So she would say things that would, you know, make a kid feel unwanted if someone heard her. And I'm sure even though she said it out her mouth, I'm sure they can sense that tension that was happening from her. Just just being able to make a comment like that, I'm sure the kids sensed that. And it was already tragedy. They lost their mom and their dad, and well, they lost their dad, and then their mom went to prison. That I'm sure those times were hard for them, so they didn't need the extra. In early 2005, Haley had talked about sending or having Rob's kids sent to Jane so that Jane can raise them. In about February of 2005, Haley filed for divorce from Rob, and it was since that the kids would go and live with Jane. During this time when things were rough for Haley and Andrew, one, he was cheating. He would spend a lot of his time in his office thinking of crimes and doing crimes for whatever reason he was doing it. It's that like fast life for him. But he had an employee who was a notary, and she had left behind her notary stamp, but he would use her notary stamp to notarize documents. And on some of his properties, on one of his properties, he would remortgage this property. He remortgaged this property 3 times using this lady's stamp. And sometimes these were properties that he didn't even legally own. He even did this on one of the properties, and the property in Vermont that Haley owned. It was in her name. He transferred it to himself. He would take out multiple mortgages on it. He was just... At one point, his real estate attorney became very suspicious. He wondered why all of these mortgages that was from out-of-state lenders all had this one notary name on it. It's not possible, right? And so that's when he became suspicious and started looking down the chain of title to see what was going on. And come to find out, he saw this is what was happening. Rob was remortgaging, getting the money, and doing who knows what with it. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul. Like that saying. At the end of the day, the FBI started to investigate Andrew, and they found that he had committed fraud in 3 states that totaled $25 million. And he was soon arrested for that. Now, prior to him being arrested, because Haley really confided in Jane, it's like, it was weird. I mean, I knew that they have a friendship, but the thing she would confide in Jane about her own brother was crazy. Like, here we have Rob, whose wife killed her husband. Rob, whose wife killed him, right? And then Haley would confide in Jane that, oh, I lay in bed and sometimes I think about just killing Andrew. It's like, how do you tell a man's sister that? And because she's already gone through that it's okay. It just didn't seem like it was right. She would even write that, and she had even wrote that in an email. Right? Things like, God, I hate your brother. It's like, leave. By the end of March of 2006, Andrew knew that the following week that he would be pleading guilty to these fraud charges, where he would serve around about 8 years in prison, in federal prison. He, in order to pay these title companies and banks and all of these people back, investors and everything, he had to liquidate everything he had. His nice car collection, watches, boats. They lost it all. Haley filing for divorce all during this time. Months earlier, he had stopped paying rent on the Greenwich property, which Haley had to go into court and get it all settled and taken care of. And in the end, she had to agree to vacate the property by the end of that month. Movers showed up on April the 1st on that Saturday. Haley had left the day before. When the movers showed up, they were just going to put everything into storage. When the movers showed up, Andrew was there. And then Haley shows up, and there was an argument because she's like, why are you here? We have to be out of here. But he told her he had nowhere to go. Her feeling sorry for the fact that he didn't have anywhere to go, she agreed to let him stay until Monday. On Sunday, April the 2nd, Andrew's one and only loyal employee shows up at his house about 6 p.m. to help him move a few things and help him out with the moving situation. Carlos Truello would have been the last person that saw Andrew alive. The next morning, that Monday, when the movers arrived, they found Andrew in the basement, bound and tied up and stabbed, dead. At the time, when the police arrived, they had no idea who would have murdered Andrew. Well, they had a handful of people. They had a long list of people who had motives to kill him. And so they did their investigation to figure out who it could possibly be. The funeral of Andrew, Haley did not show up for the funeral because due to, their family asked her not to show up to the funeral, and neither did Andrew's kids show up for the funeral. And so there was a very small amount of people, family members, that showed up for his funeral. In 2008, Andrew's employee, the chauffeur, Carlos Truello, and 2 of his cousins were arrested and charged with his murder. They stated that the motive for the murder was the fact that Truello did not want the fact that he was laundering money for Andrew to get out, so he did it to save his own hides. Because remember that Andrew was due to testify, and no one knows if he was going to testify against someone or he was going to bring up anybody, but this was his way of getting from out of it. Andrew Truello was eventually acquitted for the murder charge, but he pled guilty for the attempted murder, and he served 6 years in prison, and he got 6 years in prison. Leonard Truello, the cousin, pled guilty to manslaughter and conspiracy to commit murder, and he was given up to 20 years in prison. It's weird. Here's one person, 6 years, another person. He had to testify against his cousin, like how he get. Leonard Truello would say that he wasn't even there for the murder. He said that his cousin had asked him to murder, and he said he got $11,000 to do so. And it was over a course of time, months up to the murder, that he had gotten this money. But he said when it came down to it, he decided that he wasn't going to go through with it. He didn't even know the person who was murdered. He was supposed to have been murdering. He just knew that he was a wealthy guy, that this was going to happen to. And so he says he was not even there for the murder. And he still got up to 20 years. No one really believed Carlos Truello's story because it changed 2 times over time. At one point he would say that once he left Andrew's place, that he went straight home. Then another story, it changed that he went to Bridgeport and then he went home. So his story changed, but ultimately what the police, and what a lot of people, the rumor is that Andrew Kissel hired Carlos to kill him so that his family would get life insurance. All of this trouble that he had gotten into, if he go to prison, then his family would be left with nothing because they had already taken everything, liquidated all of his assets. But if he was to be murdered, then his family would get a sum of money. I believe that it was like a multi-million-dollar life insurance policy that would have surely made living a lot easier for Haley and the kids. So it's pretty much like he just sacrificed his life so his kids and his family could truly have better. Now, whether that's true or not, we'll never know because Truello, who was the only person who would know, is not telling. The home that Andrew rented and was murdered in sits on 2.1 acres of land. Beautiful home with 4 bedrooms. After Andrew's death, the owner attempted to rent the home out for $15,000 a month, which they were able to get under some circumstances. They later tried to sell it and they had no takers. They had that house on the market after they rented it for a little bit. They had the house on the market for about a year at $5.2 million with no buyers. They later completely destroyed the home and rebuilt it with a totally different look and put that house back on the market in 2007. And they still did not find a buyer after taking the home from $10 million to $8 million. They still didn't have a buyer. Now today, I'm not sure if they have found a buyer for this house since that time. I figured that since they completely destroyed the house and rebuilt it from the ground up, that there's chances that people will feel more comfortable with the home. But I couldn't find any record of the home on any of the real estate sites. And so what I'm assuming is that just like with the other story that I did, where they changed the address, I think that's what they did. I think they changed the address of this property. So it's no longer, it started with, it was a 10 blank blank street. I think it's still the blank blank street, but they changed the number. So it makes it a little hard. There's not many houses in that little area. There's only like, in that little, I guess, mile area, like 2 to 4 mile area, there's only like 4 to 5 houses in that little 2 to 4 mile area. So actually probably that area is probably even bigger than that, but there's only like 4 to 5 houses in that area. So they've definitely probably changed the address. I don't know how they do that or how you go about doing that, but I think that's happened. I've read somewhere that you could, if you felt something was wrong or the address wasn't in unison or something like that, that you could ask the city to do a request to have that done. But I don't know. I mean, people can do it. I'm sure people can do it, but I don't know what the process is to do that. I was reading where they talk about the different degrees of stigma that a house is, and of course murder is the top stigma that a house could have. Multiple homicides or caught killings are like at the top. Suicides and hauntings come next, and illicit sex or celebrity infidelities come, I guess, last. Although, why would celebrity infidelities even have a stigma? I would have never thought that celebrity infidelities would have a stigma. So today, I'm not exactly sure what Haley. So today, the kids are pretty much grown. They have to be in their 20s now. Rob's kids, and they are heirs to a multi-million-dollar fortune. I read somewhere that Rob's kids, or his estate, sued their mom for wrongful death. Also, I'm not exactly sure what Haley is doing today. I'm sure she's doing fine because her and her kids were able to get the life insurance policy from Andrew, so I'm sure that they are doing well, probably staying out of the public eye. But it just shows that the misfortune of this poor family, to have 2 of their family members die within, 3 years of each other. It is so very unfortunate, but it shows you on Andrew's part, stop trying to take shortcuts out of life. That's what I gather from that. I think on Rob's case, I think that his wife was just, she wanted to be with her man. Someone came in and had a reign over her that caused her to stoop to this level, and money ruled that, and money swayed her in that way to do that. But very interesting story. But thanks for joining me, and until next week,